Welcome to a new edition of System Update. I'm Glenn Greenwald. This episode explores developing events that have received far less media attention than they deserve, which is the planned reported intention of the Israeli government on July 1st to officially annex large parts of the West Bank. Now, there are many reasons why this development has received so little attention, the principal one of which is probably the fact that most countries are fixated on the coronavirus pandemic that is threatening their population, their public health, and their economy, and therefore have turned inward. And that has created a void or space for the Israeli government to do something that even 6 months ago would have been considered unthinkable, which is officially annexing huge parts of the West Bank that does not belong to it. Now, as you probably know, the Israeli government already is illegally occupying large parts of the West Bank with its notorious settlements. And when we talk about settlements, there's a tendency to have a connotation of tents that are kind of temporary, that can be easily withdrawn. But when we talk about settlements, what we're actually talking about are structures designed to be permanent, huge concrete buildings, neighborhoods guarded by Israeli military forces in which hundreds of thousands of Israelis now live on land that under international law does not belong to it. Remember that in late 2016, the UN Security Council in Resolution 2334 proclaimed those Israeli settlements to be illegal and a violation of international law. That was the resolution that President Obama refused to veto and instead abstained, and therefore it passed, and under international law, Israeli settlements in the West Bank are now deemed illegal. Beyond that illegal occupation of the West Bank that Israel is already engaged in and has been engaged in for many decades, there is also what is probably one of the most egregious, if not the most egregious, sustained human rights violation on the planet, which is what the Israelis are doing to the roughly 2 million Palestinians who live in the Gaza Strip. Although there are no more Israeli troops on Gazan soil, they control every aspect of life in Gaza through a blockade of their borders, of control over their airspace, refusing through embargoes to allow humanitarian goods to enter or leave Gaza, preventing the people of Gaza from leaving what is essentially an open-air prison. They've bombed the airport in Gaza City. They're simply prohibited from leaving because they're surrounded by Israel on most sides, by Egypt on the other. Where the border is closed, they're prevented from leaving by air. They have every aspect of their life controlled by the Israeli government and are stuffed in highly densely packed areas in a strip of land controlled by a government over which they have no democratic accountability. So when we think about why we ought to spend time caring about what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians now in the midst of a global pandemic, while our own health is at risk, while our way of life has been upended, while the economies of our countries are in collapse, while there's a protest movement around the world to finally challenge the paramilitarized police forces that have abused their authority for so long, one reason is because what the Israelis are doing, even prior to annexation, is already one of the gravest human rights violations on the planet. And so there's just an ethical and moral obligation as human beings to pay attention to it, given how long it has endured. But the other reason, even more compelling, is that if you are a citizen of a country such as the United States, that plays a major role in supporting and empowering and propping up and protecting Israeli aggression against the Palestinians, you do have a particular political and ethical obligation to pay attention to what is being done in the name of your own government. Remember that also at the end of 2016, as President Obama was on his way out of office, one of the other really significant acts that he did with regard to this conflict was codify the largest military aid package in the history of the world, $38 billion in American taxpayer money that will be transferred under this agreement signed by President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu over the next 10 years to the Israeli government, some of which is required to be spent on military hardware purchased from nominally U.S. military giants such as Raytheon and Boeing, but a lot of which are loan guarantees and a lot of which are simply transfers of cash. So if you are an American citizen or a citizen of other countries in Europe, but especially an American citizen, your government plays a critical role in these abuses of basic Palestinian rights by imagine American citizens working every day, paying taxes to their government. And that government then transfers billions of dollars every year to another country that has things like close to universal health coverage that the U.S. doesn't have, the opportunity to go to college for far less expensive tuition than Americans enjoy, transfers billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money to the Israeli government, which it then uses, the Israeli government does, to engage in aggression, to engage in illegal occupation, to engage in sustained suffering, imposing sustained suffering on millions and millions of Palestinians for many decades. What your government does in the world is something for which you have responsibility, which is why it's urgent that especially citizens of the United States pay close attention to this reported planned annexation by the Israeli government of large parts of the West Bank.